The Sounders fall flat in MLS Cup versus the Columbus Crew, the Seahawks win by a comfortable margin against the Jets, and the Huskies are whacked repeatedly by COVID. Let's take it around the sound. Hello everyone and welcome back to Around the Sound. Today is episode 27, a Wednesday edition of Around the Sound. A disappointing result from the Sounders over the weekend with their opportunity to grab their third MLS Cup in franchise history and third cup in 5 years. They did not get it done. Columbus Crew played very well. We'll talk about that. We'll cover the Seahawks and we'll touch on what happened to the Huskies because everything really fell apart due to a massive amount of positive COVID tests. Before that, I want to make sure all of you are following me on Twitter at the Peyton Thomas and the podcast on Instagram at Around the Sound Seattle. Follow that Instagram account. Don't miss a beat. We have new episodes of Around the Sound every Wednesday and Saturday. And as always, you can watch every episode of Around the Sound on YouTube at PTOM Media. That's PTHOM space media. Or you can listen to Around the Sound wherever you get your podcast. Now, heading into the MLS Cup, we expected a Columbus team that was missing a few players to play as the underdog, and a team that was willing to sit back, absorb some of the pressure from the Sounders, and play on the back foot and try to find their opportunities through counterattacking and picking their moments to get forward. That is not at all the type of MLS Cup that Brian Schmetzer wanted, or the Sounders wanted, or the MLS Cup that we expected out of Columbus. That Columbus team started on the front foot and stayed on the front foot, pedal to the metal, full foot on the gas throughout at least the whole first half before finally getting a 2-goal lead and setting back a little bit. But my biggest takeaway going into the MLS Cup was for the Sounders to avoid getting into dangerous set-piece scenarios. And the Columbus Crew had 5 set pieces in dangerous spots in the first 20 minutes of the game. Columbus was playing a higher press than I expected and were working into Seattle's passing lanes, which really debilitated that Sounders attack. Brian Schmetzer said after the game that Ladero had some sort of hamstring injury, and that's why he looked a little bit slower on the pitch at MLS Cup, but that's no real excuse. The Sounders, as dynamic as they had been all year, even with Columbus playing a high press, gambling a little bit, because they were gambling, they were pressing up a little bit, forcing the Sounders to make mistakes, the Sounders should still be able to work around that because they are technical and had all year worked really well throughout tight spaces. It did not work this game. Another big storyline heading into that game for Columbus was the absence of Darlington Nagbe and Pedro Santos, 2 important players in that Columbus Crew starting 11 that had to miss the game due to being testing positive for the coronavirus. 19-year-old Aiden Morris stepped in the center defensive mid spot for Darlington Nagbe. Derek Etienne Jr. stepped in at winger for Pedro Santos, and those 2 replacements could not have played any better. Aiden Morris, a 19-year-old, essentially dominated that midfield and kept the Sounders from getting anything forward, kept João Paulo from getting anything forward, kept Ladero from being on the ball too long, had a few crucial interceptions, one that almost led to a goal at the other end for Giassi Zardes. Derek Etienne on the wing also bagged a goal, the second goal of the night for the Columbus Crew. So Columbus Crew head into the half with a 2-0 lead, and the Sounders at halftime were sitting in a similar position in that Minnesota game. They were only down 1-0 at half, but conceded a goal a few minutes after halftime in that conference final. A lot of people were wondering if the Sounders really had enough magic dust to pull off yet another comeback, and in all reality, you can't. That's not a viable strategy. It's not a long-term strategy to hope to come back in every single game, putting yourself down at a 2-0 deficit. They say that 2-0 is the most dangerous lead. You can see why in the conference final, but in the MLS Cup, Columbus were able to lock that down. Lucas Zelarayan was the main playmaker for the Columbus Crew, not just in the first half, but throughout that entire game. He's the number 10 spot, plays a very similar role to Ladero. He scored the first goal and the third goal and created the second. Really one of the best number 10s in the league. Definitely an MVP candidate for last year. But with his play and his way of dictating the way that Columbus were moving forward in their high press, Seattle were forced to react that whole game and couldn't dictate the play. And as soon as Seattle were put on the back foot, they looked like they weren't prepared to deal with what Columbus was ready to throw at them. And I wonder if that's on Schmetzer. I wonder if it's on the coach or the captain on the preparation of this team, getting the Sounders ready to play this game. It really seemed like as soon as the Sounders game plan of trying to dictate the play and expecting Columbus to sit back, as soon as Columbus was able to surprise them with the tactics that they threw out in the first half of MLS Cup, it seemed like the Sounders were just not prepared at all to take that sort of barrage. Another questionable coaching decision from Schmetzer. A lot of questions for Schmetzer in this game, but one was certainly keeping Alex Roldan in the right back spot. Kelvin Leerdam had been the normal part of that Sounders starting 11 all year, took a hamstring injury for the first playoff game against LAFC. So Alex Roldan, the younger brother of Christian Roldan, gets put into that right back spot. It's not his natural position, but he had been training there for part of the year. Used to play center mid. Now he slides into that right back spot. Played very well against LAFC. Played relatively well against Dallas. And after those two games, it seemed like Schmetzer was willing to keep Alex Roldan in that starting spot for the Minnesota game. Subbed on Leerdam in the second half, who had then played very well. And in MLS Cup, made the bold call of starting Alex Roldan. So that right side of the Sounders lineup looked like Alex Roldan at right back, and above him was Jovan Jones on the right side. Those two really, really struggled in that game. The Jovan Jones that was on the Sounders team in 2016, led them to the MLS Cup in 2016-2017, seemed completely gone. Lost possession several times throughout the first half. Alex Roldan burned repeatedly on the defensive end. Jovan Jones did not seem to get back enough and help out Alex Roldan. A simple disaster for the Sounders on that right side. Both of Columbus's first half goals that put the Sounders in such a deficit. Coming off that right side, Columbus could have had 3 or 4 attacking that weak right side of Seattle throughout the first half. By the time that you had gotten into the second half of this game, Schmetzer did make some moves, took Jovan Jones off, and threw the lineup around a little bit. It has seemed too late. That right side was locked down in that second half, but by the time you got into that part of the game, Columbus and Caleb Porter was already in lock-it-down mode. And you saw a game and a scenario play out similar to the Minnesota game, where Seattle was on the front foot, putting 10 men up all the time and trying to find any opportunities to score your goals. Unfortunately for Seattle in this game, last time against Minnesota, they found their chances, the first one coming in the 75th minute, and were able to equalize very late on. In this game against the Columbus Crew, Seattle just did not find the same opportunities. A great defensive organization effort from Jonathan Mensah, who was a Defender of the Year candidate in MLS, and Eloy Room, the goalkeeper for the Columbus Crew. Really impressive performance from them, but also a bit of an underwhelming attacking performance for the Sounders in the second half. Created a lot of half chances, could not put anything away, which leaves the Sounders as Western Conference champions, but losing out on the MLS Cup for 2020. Congratulations to the Columbus Crew, who are a fantastic team, really fun to watch. So this game leaves the Sounders with plenty of off-season questions, and there are plenty of different paths for this Sounders team to go into going forward. You ask the front office about what's going on with Brian Schmetzer. His contract is set to run out at the end of the month on New Year's, and they still have not talked much about a contract extension for Brian Schmetzer, the coach for the Seattle Sounders since 2016, leading them to 4 of the last 5 MLS Cups. Garth Lagerwey, that front office, has talked a little bit about the Schmetzer negotiations. They've said that they want him back. I'm not sure if it's an issue if Schmetzer wants to be paid too much money or if the front office simply doesn't want him back. I have a sneaking suspicion that the main assistant coach and former Sounder, Gonzalo Pineda, may be the next guy to take the reins as head coach of the Sounders, with the front office knowing that Brian Schmetzer is near the twilight age of his career. I wonder if Gonzalo Pineda is more of a tactical-based manager than Brian Schmetzer is. Brian Schmetzer is more of an emotional, locker room-based head coach, while Gonzalo Pineda's strengths lie more in tactics and deciding what kinds of moves to make for the squad. I wonder if how the lineup fared against the Columbus Crew in the MLS Cup also plays a factor into Brian Schmetzer's contract renewal conversations, because he certainly made a number of questionable calls and questionable players on the pitch for that final against Columbus. Plenty of different options to go at the head coaching role. There's plenty of different contract options that the Sounders have also chosen to extend. They currently have 19 players on the roster. Nico Lodeiro was set to have his contract end at the end of the year. He was extended by 3 years. João Paulo's loan was set to be over. He was going to return to Botafogo in Brazil. His loan was also extended. More news to come about Sounders extensions. There's still a few players like Kelvin Leerdam that have their contracts about to run out, about to expire. The Sounders have not yet said whether those players will be returning. We'll continue to cover it on Around the Sound when that news comes out. We'll see what the Sounders lineup and Sounders roster looks like when they start training again in the early spring. Overall, a great playoff run. You cannot chalk this year up to be a failure for the Sounders, getting to yet another MLS Cup, the best in the Western Conference. You can still put Ryan Schmetzer, you can still put the Seattle Sounders in that dynasty conversation. An impressive year with, unfortunately, a very bitter ending for Sounders fans. All right, let's talk about the Seahawks, and I want to preface this big 40-3 Seahawks victory with the thing that I said and continue to say every time I talk about this Seahawks game against the Jets is they were playing the Jets. This was a defensive performance that we've all been waiting for from the Seahawks defense, but it was against an offense that is one of the worst in the entire NFL. This Seahawks defense looks like it's turning a corner. To hold the Jets to 3 points is relatively impressive. It's still not a top-tier defense. We've seen a defensive rejuvenation for the Seahawks in games against the Eagles, the Giants, and the Jets. You saw a relatively good defensive performance right before the week against the Eagles, against the Cardinals. And since that Cardinals game, you've seen a defense that is much better than the one that was going out and playing in the first few weeks of the season. But the big test for this Seahawks defensive unit, the test of whether this defensive unit has actually turned a massive corner and is no longer a weakness of the Seahawks team, will come against the Rams in week 17 and then in the playoffs following that. Another note defensively from this game, Jamal Adams broke the sack record for DBs. An Arizona Cardinals safety had held that record before at, I believe, 7.5 sacks. Jamal Adams able to get 8 sacks and break that record in this game. So congratulations to Jamal Adams doing it against his former team that he seems to have a vendetta against and still talks about and rips apart in the media from time to time. This is a Jets team that hung with the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll talk about the Jets offense for a second. That offense has scored 27 points in 3 of the last 4 games. So is the Jets offense a top-tier offense that shows that the Seahawks defense really had an impressive dominating performance? No, they're still the Jets. They're still a team that's 0-12. But the Jets have shown in their past few weeks that their problems, the reason they're 0-12 isn't simply on the offensive side. The offense is probably the stronger part of that roster that has currently 0 Pro Bowlers on it. Of any year, not a single Pro Bowler on the Jets roster. The offense has scored 27 points, 27 or more points in 3 of their past 4 games. That's got to mean something for the Seahawks defense to only hold them to 3 points. The Jets picked up that field goal on their opening drive. After that, the front 7 that was missing an injured Carlos Dunlap dominated the line of scrimmage, shut down Sam Darnold for the rest of the game, and that whole Jets offense, it was really impressive. There was a lot of drop picks. That was the main worrying part of that game for the Seahawks defense. I know Jamal Adams had a wide open interception that was thrown right to him that he flat out dropped. KJ Wright and Poona Ford had an interception that they started to fight over. One of them easily could have caught it, and they sort of ran into each other, and neither caught the ball. Those are the type of interceptions, those are the types of key plays, turning opportunities that you have to make in bigger games against the Rams or when it comes down to playoff time. Those are stupid mistakes, simple and stupid mistakes that the defense needs to make and be able to get off the field in closer games. It did not cost them because it was against the Jets, because the offense was rolling and clicking, but it really will harm them in close games when you're playing a stronger opponent if they don't take advantage of those opportunities and catch those picks, create those turnovers. Turnovers are the number one way to flip games on its head, give your offense great field position. Stupid mistakes. I hope that the Seahawks communication, catching, will create more turnover opportunities going down the stretch. With Jamal Adams' missed interception, I really had wished that he would have caught that, only to see the celebration that Jamal Adams would have. I assume there would have been maybe a taunting flag on that celebration. He would have gone straight towards the Jets sideline, shown him the ball, and ran back over to Pete Carroll. We did miss some of the Jamal personality and some of the Jamal character against the Jets, how much he hates the Jets because he dropped that pick. He had a solid rest of the game, like I said, breaking the sack record, picking up a sack against Sam Darnold, but we did miss that celebration after he dropped that interception. Let's talk about the other side of the ball for the Seahawks, the offense. Russell gets 36 passing touchdowns and breaks his personal record, which seems very odd for just how much Russell struggled in the last few weeks. Was this the Russell Wilson comeback, bounce back game from the last few weeks? That was the big question coming out of this game. It's similar to the defense, which is this was against the Jets. So how much does it mean? The Jets defense is, again, one of the worst in the league. This is closer to an MVP-esque game of Russell Wilson, but I still don't think Russ is at the same level that he was at early in the season where he was the leading MVP candidate. He threw an early first quarter interception where he was trying to lob the ball up to DK Metcalf. You don't see DK Metcalf lose out on those one-on-one opportunities very often, but it still goes up as an interception for Russell Wilson. Put a big asterisk on that Russell Wilson performance. It wasn't bad. It was certainly a bounce back. It was certainly above what we had seen Russell Wilson performance, or what his performances were for the past few weeks. It certainly was an offense that had scored more points than they did in the last few weeks, but yet again, this is not a top tier NFL defense. The biggest part of the offense that did change, that allowed the offense to score 40 points regardless of the defense that they were playing, is that the running backs are healthy. And now that Chris Carson is taking a full load, Carlos Hyde is taking his healthy load, it shows just how much the running game means to Russell Wilson's performances. A working running game is crucial to Russell Wilson's success. When Chris Carson goes down, when Carlos Hyde went down and had to take a fraction of the carries, when Travis Homer or DJ Dallas was the main running back in the backfield for the Seahawks, they could not run the ball effectively. Teams that are expecting Russell Wilson to pass, expecting him to drop back, can decide whether they want to blitz or drop all the way back in coverage, since they don't have to worry about stopping the run. They can find ways to slow down Russell Wilson. They can find ways to force turnovers out of Russell Wilson, putting the Seahawks behind the sticks with a sack, a tackle for loss, or a few incompletions, forcing Russell Wilson to then throw the ball into riskier situations. That can cause turnovers, and that's what we saw in games against the Rams. It's what we saw in the game against Buffalo. Last Sunday, everything went swimmingly on the line of scrimmage. And with the offensive line getting healthier, with the running game effectively picking up more yards, Carlos Hyde and Chris Carson had more than 6 yards per carry on their rushes this game. A much more effective offense and a much easier game for Russell Wilson to manage because he had that help around him on the offensive side of the ball. I mentioned the offensive line a little bit, but not allowing more than one sack. Really impressive performance from them. Kept the pocket clean for Russell Wilson for the majority of that game. It does help having a healthy Brandon Shell, back at that right tackle spot. The Seahawks were down to their fourth string right tackle last week against the New York Giants. Was a big weak point in that offense. And one of the main reasons that the offense struggled to get going against the New York Giants. Brandon Shell back for this game against the Jets. The offensive line plays well. They were against a subpar pass rush, so if the offensive line is now healthy, again, they're going to test their might against defensive lines as in the Rams or as in some of the best in the NFC. Once it gets to playoff time, that's when time is really going to matter. That's when the performance for the offensive line is really going to matter going forward. It was fun to see Geno Smith, the backup quarterback for the Seahawks, in action a little bit. NFL teams don't usually pull their starting quarterback. It's something you see in college a lot, especially when there's a blowout. Some of those SEC or Power 5 programs early in the year playing non-conference programs, you get up 50-7 or 50-3 in a game, you'll almost always see colleges putting in the freshman or putting in the sophomore to get him some playing time and get him some playing experience. In the NFL, you don't usually see that. Some say that it's because of fantasy implications. Some say because the league discourages it because they want their best players on the field. It's better for the league. But yeah, NFL teams don't usually pull their quarterback. It was interesting to see Pete Carroll put Geno Smith in. It was fun to see him get a little bit of action, like I said, against his former team. Geno Smith used to be a Jet. Seahawks never seem to get the chance to actually put in their backup quarterback. I'm curious if it's something that Pete Carroll would do regularly had he been up regularly by that much of a score. But since the Seahawks choose to win most of their games in the dying embers on final plays with crazy scenarios late in the fourth quarter, the Seahawks never really often get the chance to put in their backup quarterback, never really get the chance to have comfortable 40-3 victories. That's the largest margin of victory for the Seahawks since Super Bowl 48 against the Broncos, which seems really, really crazy to me. Of course, that game being the famous 43-8, the Seahawks' only Super Bowl to this day. All right, Seahawks get the Washington Football Team next Sunday, who is right now on fire, have won 4 out of their last 4 games. The NFC East tank division is quickly becoming a contender. Well, not a contender, but one of their teams is going to reach the playoffs. It looks most likely to be either the New York Giants, who lost to the Arizona Cardinals this weekend, or the Washington Football Team, who the Seahawks have upcoming. They beat the San Francisco 49ers this past weekend. That Washington Football Team defense looks like no joke. They're playing very, very well. We'll have a full preview on Around the Sound on Saturday for that game. Tell you everything you need to know about the Washington Football Team and how the Seahawks match up against them before the game on Sunday. All right, let's talk about the Huskies. It was signing day a couple days ago, and the Huskies did get a few notable players, but today I really wanted to focus on what happened with the Pac-12 championship game. Last week, the Huskies were slated to play Oregon in the final game of the regular season to determine who would be the Pac-12 North champion, and Oregon kind of got 2020. The Huskies had a lot of positive tests within their program, could not play the game. The game was then declared a no contest, which meant that the Huskies finished on top of the Pac-12 North with a 3-1 record. Oregon slightly behind them with a 3-2 record. And then the Huskies really got 2020'd. The Huskies could not get 53 players eligible to play against USC in the Pac-12 championship game, which is scheduled for this Friday, which means the Huskies were forced to withdraw from the Pac-12 championship game. Really, really unfortunate for the Washington Huskies program. Oregon at 3-2 being the next eligible team will take the Washington Huskies spot and play USC this weekend in the Pac-12 championship. The winner of that game obviously getting into a good, one of the best bowls in the country. The Huskies had to roll out a limited roster against Stanford, and that's something that a lot of people did not realize until after the game when you saw who actually took the amount of snaps for the Huskies. Huskies had several positive tests going into that Stanford game, but even with the Pac-12's strict COVID-19 rules, testing rules, and contract tracing rules, the Huskies still had enough players that were eligible and did not have the virus to play that game against Stanford, which they did then lost. But after that game, the Huskies really got hit with those positive tests. And according to Jimmy Lake, now the whole offensive line unit is tested positive for the coronavirus, along with a bunch of skill players on both offense and defense. He said there's no way his team can practice, and for sure they cannot play a game anytime soon. On last week's episodes of Around the Sound, after the Oregon game was canceled, I said, will this Huskies team be able to get over this virus and have a chance to play in the Pac-12 championship game next week? Remember, that was last week. It did look a little bit optimistic, but until we saw the numbers for just how many positive tests there are, although we don't know the exact numbers, it was really when Jimmy Lake said to the media how much of his team was out positive with the virus and what are the odds that his team will actually be able to play this weekend. After that happened, we really got to know the magnitude and the likeliness of the Huskies being able to play against USC in the championship game was very, very low. Oregon will take Washington's place in the Pac-12 championship game. That means the Huskies season could be over. With their record, they could be eligible for a bowl game in this weird 2020 season. Normally, you would need 6 wins in a college football season to be eligible for a bowl game. Since 2020, the bowl rules have changed. The BCS has changed their rules. Who knows what the rest of the season looks like. There still could be an Apple Cup this year. There still could be a bowl game for the Huskies. The Huskies could have no more games. The players are still quarantined, but as of right now, there are no remaining games scheduled on the Huskies schedule. There's no more games that are set to be played in the future. The team has a lot of talent and a lot of time to grow for next year, and thankfully with all of the coronavirus and crazy year that college football has had to endure, the NCAA is giving everybody an extra year of eligibility if they want it. The team did not disclose the exact number of coronavirus cases, but this could be wait for next year. This could be a thing for Washington Husky fans, a year that was overall probably a success. You saw a freshman quarterback. You saw a lot of new faces. You got a new coach who found some success very early on, started off 3-0. And going forward, it's a team that has a great outlook on the future and a team that looks ready to compete in the Pac-12 with a new young coaching staff, a lot of new young core like ZTF on the defensive side of the ball or the quarterback on the offensive side of the ball. So Thankfully, none of the kids, according to Jimmy Lake, are having any major symptoms due to the coronavirus. The kids are doing well, so expect all of those guys to be back on the field soon. If this is the last that we hear of the Washington Huskies football program for 2020, I have to ask, was it worth it? I mean, the team only got 4 games played. The Pac-12 started later than any other Power 5 conference in the country. The players had to endure months away from their family, quarantined with their team to avoid getting the virus. When the Huskies or any other Pac-12 team did play, they were playing in empty stadiums in front of absolutely no fans. Their families couldn't come attend the games. It's a tough call. And 2020 is an unprecedented year. It's the word everybody loves to use. But it's a year that's been tough on all of us, and it's a tough call whether it probably was worth it for these football players. But you kind of have to ask the players if it was worth it. I think for most of the fans, the answer is yes. People love to watch the students play, and students that some of them go to school with, students that are their kids or their brothers or their cousins or whatever. Fans love to see those games being played with a school that they have a connection with and that they are fans of. But you have to ask the players if that was worth it for them to quarantine that long just to play the game that they love. And I'm sure many of them would say yes. If they said no, they probably would have opted out at some point. But this game, football, is their livelihood, and I'm really glad that they got to play it at least a few times this year in the crazy year that 2020 has been. Thankful for them that they do not lose a year of eligibility. Right now, no games scheduled, like I said, so could be the end of the 2020 season for the Washington Huskies. Another scenario in 2020 where we'll just have to sit, watch, and react to what happens, what goes on after the Pac-12 championship game, and what bowl season looks like this year. All right, that's all we had to get through today on Around the Sound. So, like I said, make sure you follow that Instagram account to stay up to date with Around the Sound. We'll be back here on Saturday to preview the Seahawks' big game against the Washington football team. Despite Washington football team's losing record, still a tough team that is playing very, very well. So we'll talk about that later this week. There's plenty of more exciting stuff going on as we get closer to the holiday season, get closer to Christmas. I'm sure a bunch of you are getting off school or work or whatever. So we'll see you guys on Saturday. Stay safe, and thanks for listening.